Dinosaur skeletons are rarely found with the bones lying in their proper places.
We don't know if we found the brain case or the very front part of the nose, the Tyrannosaurus rex. Those would be extremely important to find because it would finish giving Duffy a face.
Two men stand in the dirt, smiling beside what looks like a dinosaur skeleton. At first, it seems like just another old photo, but when experts zoom in, they freeze. The bones show impossible details.
One feature in its bones that hasn't been seen in any other dinosaur.
The setting raises red flags, and new discoveries in 2025 change everything we thought we knew about fossils, hoaxes, and history itself. Could this be real, or the most elaborate fake ever made? Let's discover. The photo, the claims, the stakes. At first glance, it feels like the kind of photograph you might see in a dusty family album from the early 20th century. But when experts zoom in, the mood shifts from curiosity to disbelief. They see details that raise questions no one expected to face in the 21st century. Is this the photograph of a genuine dinosaur skeleton being unearthed by amateurs? Could it be the greatest discovery never properly recorded? Or are we looking at yet another elaborate fraud, designed to trick both the public and the scientific world? The claim attached to the image is simple enough. Two men allegedly stumbled on the remains while digging in a remote patch of ground, and they wanted to record the moment before passing it on. There are no excavation records, no site reports, no plaster field jackets holding fragile bones together, just the picture itself. The background suggests rough countryside, uneven terrain with little vegetation, the kind of place where fossil-bearing rock might indeed be exposed. Their clothing looks ordinary for working men of the early 20th century. Suspenders, rolled-up sleeves, the practicality of manual laborers. On the surface, it all seems plausible enough, and yet the photograph alone is not proof. The shock that caused seasoned experts to turn pale was not the idea of men finding fossils. Paleontologists expect that, but what the close inspection revealed. Why would an image like this cause such unease? The reason is that when analysts zoom in, they notice details that seem impossible to ignore. In one corner of the skeleton, the bone texture shows patterns that mimic the porous structure paleontologists recognize from genuine fossils, the kind of microscopic channels where blood once flowed. Along the jawline, teeth appear rooted in a way consistent with known dinosaur specimens.
Found a lot of cool dinosaurs. Let's start off with the Triceratops. We got a ton of their teeth. But we also got
not the clean, repeating casts found in replicas. Even the surrounding rock matrix looks convincing, with tiny inclusions and sediment layering that suggests natural burial rather than staged placement. For some experts, this level of anatomical and geological accuracy feels too good to dismiss, especially if the photo predates modern special effects. But the same zoomed-in details also set off alarm bells. There are inconsistencies that feel unnatural. Some outlines show suspicious halos, the faint borders that occur when two separate images are blended together. Certain bone textures seem to repeat, almost as if copied and pasted, something a sharp-eyed digital analyst can spot immediately. The lighting across the men and the skeleton does not perfectly match, with shadows falling in slightly different directions. Forensic specialists point out that such mismatches can indicate compositing, whether intentional or not. The very features that make the photo appear realistic to some are exactly what others see as evidence of careful fakery. This is not the first time such a controversy has appeared. Anyone who has followed the world of cryptic photography knows the infamous Civil War pterosaur pictures.
Civil War pterosaur photo.
Images that supposedly showed soldiers posing with the carcass of a massive winged reptile. For decades, they circulated in books, magazines, and eventually the internet, sparking endless arguments about whether they were authentic. Investigations revealed that one of the most famous examples was, in fact, a staged prop created for a 1990s television show, Haxan Films' Freaky Links. Other versions were proven to be digitally altered, with wings or corpses inserted into historical backdrops. Despite being debunked, the images remain popular, recycled on forums and social media because they tap into something powerful: the human desire to believe that history still holds shocking secrets. To move beyond speculation, we need structure. In this investigation, we will look at the photograph using 5 clear criteria. First, the provenance: where the photo came from, who took it, and whether its history can be verified. Second, the anatomy and taphonomy. Does the skeleton's structure make sense scientifically, and is the way it appears consistent with how fossils are actually preserved in rock layers? Third, photoforensics. The technical breakdown of lighting, texture, and digital or analog anomalies. Fourth, the question of ethics and ownership. If such a find were real, who would have rights to it, and what responsibilities would the discoverers face? Finally, we will ask what real science would do next, how researchers would study, test, and publish such a discovery if it were genuine. As we proceed, keep in mind that 2025 has already brought new paleontological breakthroughs that influence how we evaluate such cases. Scientists recently discovered preserved blood vessels in the ribs of Tyrannosaurus rex, proving that soft tissue structures can survive for millions of years under rare conditions. Another team identified previously unknown cheek-like structures in certain dinosaurs, reshaping our understanding of their appearance and feeding habits. In Texas, floods uncovered fresh dinosaur tracks that have been carefully documented and studied with modern scanning techniques. Each of these stories demonstrates how much science can now extract from bones, impressions, and even microscopic remains. They also provide a crucial comparison point. When real discoveries happen, they are accompanied by layers of documentation, analysis, and peer review, not just a single ambiguous photograph. The most sensational and recent developments. In August of 2025, the ground itself opened in Texas and revealed something no one expected to see so clearly: fresh dinosaur tracks stretching across mudflats after heavy floods receded. These were more than 15 massive three-toed marks measuring between 18 and 20 inches long, preserved with such clarity that paleontologists could make out the ridges of claws and the subtle pressure patterns left by shifting weight. Volunteers who first spotted them in Travis County quickly called in experts, and within days, the site became one of the most remarkable natural exposures of the year. Preliminary analysis identified the trackmaker as a theropod, similar to Acrocanthosaurus, a predator.
Dinosaurs on the continent. This was Acrocanthosaurus, the Titan Butcher,
That stalked the region over 100 million years ago. What made this discovery so groundbreaking was not only the sudden appearance of the trackway, but the technology used to document it. Drones were flown overhead to capture the full spread of tracks, while three-dimensional scanning tools mapped every depression in precise detail. These methods create a permanent record of the site before weather or erosion can damage it, giving scientists a digital copy to study for decades to come. Compare that to the photo of 2 men beside a skeleton. The Texas tracks are real, datable, and supported by context. They exist in a measurable layer of rock. They were found by multiple people, and they are now part of the scientific record, not just a mystery image shared online. The Texas trackway was only one of several shocking headlines this year that changed how we think about fossils and the information they can still carry. In July 2025, researchers working on Scotty, the nickname for one of the largest Tyrannosaurus rex skeletons ever unearthed, revealed that preserved blood vessels had been identified in one of its ribs. To grasp how unusual this is, remember that Tyrannosaurus rex lived 68 million years ago. For soft tissue structures like blood vessels to survive such vast spans of time is extraordinary. The preserved tissues are not still flexible like living blood, but mineralized traces and microscopic remains that retain the shape and arrangement of the original biology. By analyzing them with histology, thin slices of bone studied under microscopes, and paleoproteomics, which looks for ancient proteins, scientists can learn not only how these creatures healed injuries, but also how their bodies functioned. In Scotty's rib, evidence suggested that the bone had undergone healing, meaning the animal survived a traumatic injury and lived long enough for its blood vessels to remodel. Why does this matter for our case? Because if someone claimed to have uncovered a skeleton with suspiciously well-preserved tissues, there are already laboratory methods capable of testing whether the structures are genuine fossils or modern fakes. That ties into another development from March 2025, when a team at North Carolina State University confirmed that soft tissue preservation is not as rare as once thought. By systematically re-examining a wide range of specimens, they documented multiple examples of vessels, cartilage, and even collagen fibers that had endured for tens of millions of years. Their work showed that under the right chemical conditions, low oxygen, mineral replacement, and rapid burial, biological material can persist. This is significant because whenever a claim arises about too good to be true fossils showing skin or vessels, scientists now have a framework for how to test them. No longer can extraordinary claims be dismissed out of hand. They can be subjected to chemical assays, microscopic analysis, and controlled comparisons. This creates a path for moving from mystery toward confirmation, something the photograph of our two men and their supposed skeleton has never been able to provide. Even when there are no soft tissues involved, new discoveries continue to reshape what we know about dinosaur anatomy. In May 2025, researchers from the University of Alberta reported the identification of an entirely new structure in certain dinosaurs, which they called exoparia. These were cheek-like features that had not been recognized before, reconstructed from the careful study of fossil skulls and musculature. The finding changes our understanding of how these animals fed and looked, and it demonstrates that important insights often emerge not from dramatic photographs, but from painstaking examination of bones under controlled conditions. It also proves a crucial point. Subtle details are usually what separate authentic fossils from fabricated props. The exoparia would never be noticed in a blurry photograph. They became clear only through direct access to the material and rigorous comparative anatomy. Another headline that drew attention came in June 2025 when the Natural History Museum in London unveiled a brand new species, Enigma cursor mollyborthwickae.
This is Enigma cursor mollyborthwickae. It's just gone on display for the public to see, and it's a small dinosaur.
This small two-legged herbivore lived in what is now North America during the late Jurassic period and was discovered in the Morrison Formation, a site famous for yielding some of the most iconic dinosaurs. The announcement was not just about naming a new species, but also about how the process unfolded: excavation, documentation, peer-reviewed publication, and finally display in a major museum. The discovery sparked excitement because it was both surprising and verifiable. Visitors can see the skeleton, read the published research, and follow the chain of evidence from rock to museum hall. That level of transparency stands in stark contrast to a mysterious photo with no clear provenance. If you step back and consider all these developments together, the tracks in Texas, the blood vessels in Scotty's rib, the confirmation of soft tissue survival across multiple fossils, the discovery of exoparia, and the unveiling of Enigma cursor, you see a pattern emerge. Real discoveries share certain qualities. They can be dated. They exist in physical layers of rock. They are documented by multiple observers. They are subjected to repeatable tests. They are published in accessible research. They are ultimately available for other scientists and even the public to examine. So ask yourself, If the skeleton in that photograph is genuine, why has it never gone through this process? If it were real, should it not be capable of withstanding the same scrutiny we now apply to every legitimate discovery? This gives us a checklist as we move forward. For the photograph to hold up, it must have provenance. Who took it, where, and when? It must pass anatomical checks. Does the skeleton align with known species or plausible relatives? It must endure photoforensic analysis. No suspicious halos, no repeated textures, no inconsistent lighting. It must respect ethical considerations. Fossils cannot simply be pulled from the ground and hidden. And finally, it must withstand the scientific method, the same rigorous tests applied to Scotty, to the Texas tracks, and to every newly described species. If it cannot, then no matter how pale experts may look when they first zoom in, the truth will eventually surface under the weight of evidence. Provenance, chain of custody, or chain of claims. Who was behind the lens? Where exactly did it happen? And what can be traced about its journey from the supposed moment of discovery to the present day? In the case of the two men standing proudly with a dinosaur skeleton, those questions are challenging to answer. Authentic scientific finds are always accompanied by some form of record-keeping, field notes, journals, quarry maps, or in the modern era, GPS coordinates and digital metadata. Without those, the photograph sits adrift in history, a chain of claims without a chain of custody. If this image is truly analog, perhaps from the early 20th century, we would expect the film stock and development process to leave signatures. Every photographic emulsion type has a unique grain structure. Every camera lens from that era produces characteristic distortions, and every developer chemical leaves subtle halos or contrast marks. Those artifacts can be studied to determine whether the photo plausibly belongs to the period. In contrast, if the image is digital, it should carry metadata such as date, time, and camera type. Stripped metadata is always a red flag, especially when coupled with a sensational subject. Another crucial detail comes from the men in the frame themselves. Clothing is a surprisingly powerful tool for dating an image. Suspenders, collar styles, the cut of trousers, the type of hats, and even the material of boots can help narrow down a decade. For example, workmen in the 1920s typically wore button-fly trousers and flat caps, while by the 1940s, denim and snap shirts were far more common in excavation work. Tools also tell their own story. The design of a shovel blade, the handle material, or whether a pickaxe has a modern fiberglass shaft or a traditional hickory, one can expose anachronisms. If the photograph is claiming to show men from the early 1900s, but the gear matches late 20th century styles, then the image falters under scrutiny. Historians and archivists often use precisely this kind of periodization analysis.
I think worldwide, there's hardly any specimens ever found to that level of detail.
To detect manipulated or staged scenes. Equally important is the context of the ground itself, known to geologists as the matrix. Fossils are not found in isolation. They are part of specific layers of sediment that tell a geological story. Limestone, sandstone, shale, and volcanic ash, each record a different environment. And paleontologists can often identify whether a fossil belongs where it was supposedly found just by examining the surrounding rock. If the photo shows a skeleton lying in clean dirt with no visible stratification, that is suspicious. Real excavations almost always reveal complex layers, with fossil bone encased in a contrasting matrix that requires careful chiseling and plaster jackets. Associated fauna and flora are another clue. Fossil leaves, shells, or small bones usually accompany large finds. Their absence in a wide-open skeleton scene is another sign that the picture may have been staged. History provides many precedents for this pattern. Hoax images often share telltale visual grids, the proud discoverers posing in the foreground, the specimen lying implausibly complete, and the overall composition resembling studio photography rather than field documentation. Consider the so-called Civil War pterosaur photographs. which appeared convincing until closer inspection revealed theatrical staging, inconsistent shadows, and in one case a direct link to a late 20th century television production. Analyses collected on sites like Lividinopedia and Carl Schuker's blog detail how these images reuse the same formulas: heroes with props, theatrical corpses, and carefully framed compositions to exploit viewers' expectations. The photograph of our two men falls neatly into this pattern, echoing familiar hoax iconography. At this point, it is worth asking, if this photograph is legitimate, where are the records? If a fossil of such magnitude had ever been found, it would have generated permits, land ownership disputes, excavation reports, and at least some mention in regional archives. Fossils belong either to private landowners, who often sell them or donate them, or to public land where excavation requires strict permits. No paper trail exists in connection with this image, and the silence of the historical record is almost deafening. Zoomed in, what forensic analysts actually do. When a controversial photograph surfaces, the eye can only take us so far, and that is why forensic analysts exist. Their role is to move beyond impressions and dive into the physical and digital signatures that every image carries, the subtle fingerprints of the camera, the film, or the sensor. In the case of the two men standing beside a dinosaur skeleton, a forensic approach means asking not only what the image shows, but how it was made. The methods used are technical, but they are not inaccessible. And when explained in simple terms, they reveal why experts either go pale with shock or shake their heads at yet another carefully engineered hoax. If the photo is truly analog, captured on film, analysts start by looking at the grain itself. Every photographic emulsion has a characteristic texture.
Dinosaur, you have the high, narrow skull, big eyes, and notice that all of the strength of the muscles of the jaw.
The random scatter of silver crystals suspended in gelatin. In a genuine photograph, this grain is consistent across every part of the image. But if the skeleton was composited into the scene, the grain in that section will often appear mismatched, either too smooth or too coarse compared to the surrounding areas. They also check for halation, the subtle glow that occurs around bright highlights when light bounces inside the film base. Authentic photographs from the early 20th century show this effect naturally, whereas pasted or painted elements lack it. Developer chemistry leaves its own marks as well, like streaks or tone variations depending on how the film was processed. And these too should be uniform throughout the frame. Lens aberrations, such as vignetting around the corners or chromatic fringing along high contrast edges, provide another clue. If the skeleton is inserted from another source, its edges will not carry the same lens distortions, creating an inconsistency that the human brain may miss, but a trained eye will spot immediately. Optical compositing, done by cutting and rephotographing images, also leaves hard edges, poor blending, and unnatural shadows that analysts can confirm under magnification. If the photograph is digital, the methods shift to examining metadata and pixel-level structure. Every digital photo typically carries EXIF data, a record of the camera model, exposure time, date, and even GPS location if enabled. When a photo of this importance arrives stripped of metadata, analysts become suspicious, because while some platforms do remove EXIF automatically, intentional deletion is often done to conceal the true origin. Resampling grids and error level analysis are next. By artificially compressing and decompressing an image, forensic software can highlight areas that behave differently, revealing regions that may have been copied or altered.
As the tooth goes through the meat and meets the bone, it can punch right into the bone.
Lighting and shadow coherence is another test. Analysts map out the direction and quality of light across objects in the frame. If the men cast shadows at one angle, but the skeleton reflects light from another, it indicates compositing. Depth of field anomalies work similarly. A real photograph will blur foreground and background according to the camera's aperture setting, but a spliced-in object may appear too sharp or too soft. compared to its surroundings. Demosaicing patterns, the arrangement of color information captured by the camera sensor, should also be consistent across the entire image.
We hadn't found anything that I would say was really great.
If parts of the photo carry a different demosaicing pattern, it is a clear sign of manipulation. But the newest challenge is not analog trickery or simple digital cut and paste, it is artificial intelligence. AI-generated images, or deepfakes, can mimic period photography with astonishing fidelity. Analysts are trained to look for repeating textures because generative algorithms often replicate the same details in different areas. A row of identical scratches on bones or scales repeating like wallpaper is a classic AI artifact. Edge fringing around complex shapes such as teeth, sutures, or fine cracks often appears unnatural because the model struggles with precise boundaries. Inconsistent micro-shadows, like tiny gaps between bone and dirt, lit in ways that do not match the rest of the scene, also give away synthetic origins. Another subtle giveaway is improbable bone weathering. Real fossils have specific erosion patterns, with certain surfaces smoothed by sediment and others fractured. But AI may create bones that look too perfect or inconsistently aged. To conduct all these tests, forensic labs rely on specialized workflows and software. Companies like Cellebrite and platforms like the Amped blog detail professional approaches that combine automated scanning tools with expert interpretation. Analysts do not simply run one test, they stack multiple lines of evidence. Marina Amaral, who is known for forensic photo analysis, emphasizes how context, technical evaluation, and historical cross-checks all work together. Science, direct journals describe the deeper mathematics, but the essential principle is straightforward. Every image carries artifacts that reveal how it was created. Historical photos are increasingly vulnerable because AI can mimic old emulsions, grain, and paper texture. Yet the flaws still appear when magnified at the pixel level. So what does it mean when experts zoom in and suddenly go pale? It can mean one of two very different outcomes. On the one hand, they might be seeing genuine micro-details that align perfectly with what real fossil preparation reveals. The rough channels where blood vessels once passed through bone, the uneven polish of sediment grains embedding themselves into cavities, or the subtle crack lines caused by geological pressure. On the other hand, their shock could come from spotting forensic artifacts that scream manipulation. Halos around edges, cloned textures repeating unnaturally, inconsistent depth of field, or shadows falling in ways that contradict the rest of the scene. It's the job of analysts to peel back those layers one by one, until they either reveal the authentic scars of history or the artificial seams of invention. Anatomy and taphonomy. Does the skeleton make biological sense? When paleontologists look at any fossil claim, their first instinct is not to marvel at the size of the bones, but to check whether the anatomy makes sense. Skeletons tell stories, and those stories must align with everything we know about evolution, biomechanics, and the fossil record. If the skull in the photograph is shown with fenestrae, those large openings in the head behind the eyes.
So the original skull is on exhibit next door by itself, and you can get very, very close to it, and the skull on the skeleton is a cast.
They must match patterns known from specific clades of dinosaurs. Theropods, for example, have distinctive window-like openings that lighten the skull and anchor jaw muscles. If the photo depicts a creature with fenestrae inconsistent with any known group, or worse, with features mashed together from different clades, alarm bells ring. Dentition is another giveaway. Carnivorous dinosaurs like Allosaurus or Tyrannosaurus have recurved, serrated teeth, while herbivores display flat grinding surfaces or beak-like structures. Mixing sharp predator teeth with herbivore skull proportions is a sign of an assembled or fabricated specimen. Vertebrae and limb proportions are equally critical. The spacing of neural spines, the robustness of limb bones, and the ratio between forelimbs and hind limbs can be compared to known taxa. and inconsistencies are immediately obvious to specialists who have studied dozens of skeletons. But the story of a skeleton does not end with classification. It extends to taphonomy, the science of how organisms die, decay, and are buried. Natural death poses a body in particular ways. Dinosaurs are often found with the classic death pose, neck arched backward due to ligament tightening during decomposition. Limbs usually splay or tuck depending on how the animal collapsed, and sediment transport may scatter elements. If the skeleton in the image is laid out in a perfectly complete and symmetrical arrangement, it looks more like a classroom reconstruction than a natural fossilization event. Bones rarely preserve so neatly aligned without some disturbance. Taphonomy also reveals transport evidence, like abrasion from water or partial articulation, where some bones remain in place while others drift. Analysts looking at the photo must ask, does this look like an animal buried by nature, or a skeleton arranged by human hands for dramatic effect? The microscale details add another layer. In authentic fossils, vascular canals run through bones, leaving tiny branching patterns where blood vessels once passed. Histology, the microscopic study of bone slices, reveals growth rings much like those in trees, showing how the animal aged. In Scotty, the Tyrannosaurus rex, histological work even revealed remodeled bone consistent with healed injuries, and preserved blood vessels were reported in July 2025. If the skeleton in our photograph were real, thin sections of bone under a microscope would confirm whether it shows natural histological banding, collagen peptide residues, or mineral phases consistent with fossilization. A fake would fail these tests immediately, since plaster, resin, or carved stone lacks the microscopic complexity of living bone turned to fossil. If the image also claims to show soft tissues such as skin or fascia impressions, there are additional methods available. Micro-CT scanning can reveal subsurface textures, scanning electron microscopy can expose microstructure, and proteomics can detect surviving proteins. Studies published this year show that such techniques are increasingly reliable, so any claim of preserved skin must go through them before being believed. Of course, even if the anatomy and taphonomy check out, the context of the discovery must also stand up. Consider how the Texas trackways were handled in August 2025. Volunteers reported the discovery immediately. Paleontologists arrived. The site was surveyed, drones documented the impressions, and three-dimensional scans preserved the data. The tracks were not posted as a mysterious image online with no provenance. Instead, they became part of a coordinated scientific and public record, with careful control over location details to protect the landowner's privacy while ensuring verification. That is how real discoveries enter history. This leads to a critical question. If the photograph were authentic, how would the finders have acted differently? The answer is clear. They would have secured the perimeter to prevent contamination or vandalism. They would have contacted a regional museum or university to bring in professional excavators. They would have avoided self-extracting such a fragile specimen, since improper removal risks destroying it. The entire process would have been documented step by step, ensuring that future researchers could reconstruct the scene and evaluate the evidence. None of this happened here. So when we merge the anatomical checks with the field reality check, the picture becomes clearer. The skeleton in the photograph must be evaluated not just for whether the bones look right, but for whether the context makes sense. If experts turned pale, it was not from awe, but from the unsettling power of deception. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.